Welcome to Detective Reddington's office. Take a seat and listen to this story. It will be interesting. It all started so subtly that I didn't even notice at first. My life with Amanda had always been calm, even routine. We had been together for 6 years, and I was helping raise her son from a previous marriage, Luke. His father, Eric, was always around, as expected, since they were co-parenting. But lately, I started noticing things that made me uneasy. Amanda used to leave her phone in plain sight, but that had changed. Her smartphone was now always face down, and she rarely left it unattended. More than that, she began spending more time with Eric, explaining it as necessary for Luke's sake. It made sense, but there was something in her tone when she talked about it that didn't sit right with me. The worst part was that she had started staying over at Eric's house. At first, it happened once, then a second time. Every time I asked about it, she would say, "Luke is having a hard time, and I need to be there." She said it so confidently that I even tried to believe it. But deep down, something told me this wasn't just about Luke. As time passed, every night she spent at Eric's, I couldn't sleep. Every night felt like torture. I imagined what they were doing, what those family nights were really about. Each time I tried to calm myself, a thought would hit me like a slap in the face. What if they're together again? Maybe their divorce was a mistake, and now they're rekindling old feelings? I tried to push the thought away, but the doubts were creeping in. It was a regular evening. Amanda had made dinner, and we sat down to eat together, but there was an undeniable chill in the air. She kept glancing at her phone. Her laughter, as she read messages, was so unnatural. The kind of laugh you hear when someone's hiding something. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "What's so funny?" I asked calmly, trying not to sound too suspicious. "Oh, nothing. Just Eric texting about Luke," she replied too quickly, almost dismissively. She slipped her phone into her bag and carried on with dinner, but I could no longer eat. I felt like I had no choice but to start checking her actions. It didn't feel good, but my suspicions grew by the day. I remembered a couple of weeks ago when she came home after a night at Eric's, in the same dress she'd worn on our first date. She looked happy, and I knew it wasn't because of me. The next day, I tried to get into her phone, but I couldn't. She changed the password, and that only deepened my suspicions. She was drifting away from me, physically present but emotionally distant. My confidence in our marriage was crumbling with every new excuse she gave. I started to wonder, maybe I was overreacting? Maybe this was just jealousy clouding my judgment? But each time I saw her texting Eric or quickly answering his calls, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was off. I couldn't take it anymore. The suspicions gnawed at me daily, so I decided I needed proof. I knew it was wrong to snoop, but when you feel like you're being deceived, trust becomes irrelevant. One day, when Amanda left again to check on Luke, I grabbed her laptop. She always left it at home since she usually worked from her phone. This was my chance. Of course, it was password protected. I tried a few combinations, but nothing worked. Then, after several attempts, I guessed it, her password was Luke's birthday. That's when everything clicked into place. Her conversations with Eric were synced to the cloud, and they had nothing to do with Luke. In one of the messages, she mentioned how much she missed the old days when they were together, how she still remembered his touch. But what really shattered me was when she talked about his athletic build and how much better he was in bed, comparing it to our sex life. My anger flared. I shut the laptop and couldn't think straight. They weren't just seeing each other for the child. They were together for themselves. This was betrayal in the worst way, not just physical but emotional. I didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. I could never trust Amanda again. I sat in the living room, replaying the last few weeks in my head. Amanda hadn't come home yet, which gave me plenty of time to plan my next move. When she finally walked through the door, her face was lit up with that same smile that now filled me with disgust. She greeted me like nothing had happened, as if she hadn't been texting those awful things just hours before. "How's Luke?" I asked calmly, trying to keep the rage out of my voice. "He's doing better. That's why I stayed a little longer," she said quickly, setting her phone down on the table. My hand clenched into a fist. "Stayed a little longer. Now I knew what that really meant. She wasn't even hiding anymore. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more information before I made my move. "You and Eric seem to be getting along well," I remarked, keeping my eyes on her face. Amanda didn't flinch. Her eyes remained calm, but I noticed the slight tension in her lips before she replied. "Well, he's Luke's father. We've always gotten along. You know that, Jack?" she said, her voice too smooth, too practiced. She was a master at making excuses, a master at lying. But now I knew that it was all just a cover. I couldn't take her words at face value anymore. I was furious inside, but I kept my cool. I needed to gather more before making any rash decisions. "All right," I said quietly, feeling the anger simmer just below the surface. I needed more proof. I couldn't afford to be wrong, and every step now had to be calculated. The evening passed in awkward silence. Amanda acted as if everything was normal. She was even a bit more cheerful, which only made me more suspicious. But I decided not to push it. Time was on my side, and I needed to stay calm. That night was unbearable. I lay next to her, hearing every breath, and thinking about what I had seen on her laptop. I could no longer sleep next to someone who was hiding such a terrible betrayal. The thought of her talking about Eric, his body, his advantages over me, struck at my very core. But I had to wait for the right moment. The next morning, she left for work earlier than usual, and this time I decided to follow her. I wasn't the kind of man who spied on his wife, but now I had no choice. I needed to see if she was really going to work or heading to Eric's place again. When she drove off, I took a different route and approached their house from the other side. My heart pounded when I saw her car parked in front. She hadn't gone to work. She had gone to him. This wasn't just deception anymore. It was something deeper. As I sat in my car near Eric's house, I couldn't take my eyes off their driveway. Every minute felt like an eternity. My body was tense, and her words from those texts echoed in my head. She had mentioned, again and again, how amazing Eric was in bed, how his body thrilled her. When I read it, something inside me broke. Now those thoughts haunted me. Suddenly, the door opened. Amanda stepped out, smiling, wearing the same clothes she had on that morning. She wasn't in a hurry. Her movements were calm and confident. She wasn't worried that I might find out. I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of my car and approached her, trying to keep my cool. "What are you doing here?" I asked quietly, but my voice trembled with restrained anger. Amanda froze for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. "I told you Luke is having problems," she said, not meeting my gaze. Her lies were now blatant. She wasn't even trying to cover them up anymore. I knew this was the end, either of our marriage or my faith in ever fixing it. That was the moment when everything inside me collapsed. I stood at a crossroads, continue pretending nothing was wrong, or finally take action. The choice was agonizing, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. They were playing with me, with my life, with my sense of dignity. All the way home, I couldn't stop thinking. How long had this been going on? Had Eric always been more than just Luke's father in our lives? Had I been turning a blind eye to obvious signs? My head spun with these thoughts, but I knew I had to keep my cool. I couldn't destroy everything out of emotion alone. At home, I sat at the table, thinking over my options. I wanted revenge. I wanted them both to suffer the way I was suffering. But at the same time, I wanted to know if there was still a chance to save my family. My thoughts tore me apart, but I decided not to rush. I grabbed my phone and made a plan. Gather more evidence, get more information. I would be ready when the time came to act. #### Part 8. To stay or to leave? The next few days passed in tense silence. I didn't know how to act around Amanda while everything inside me boiled with rage. I tried to behave as though nothing had changed. I needed more time, more proof before I could act decisively. Each time she left for her so-called meetings with Eric for Luke's sake, I felt the ground beneath me shake. It was as if I was living in a parallel reality where everyone but me knew the truth. And every time she came home, my patience thinned. I didn't know how much longer I could stand it. One evening, I decided to take a step. "Are you going to Eric's again soon?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Amanda paused for a moment, her eyes darting as if she was scrambling to collect her thoughts. Her answer was predictable. It's just for Luke. You know he's going through a tough time. Eric's worried too, she said, not looking up from her phone. My anger flared up again. I knew by now that her words were lies. Everything she'd been saying lately was just a cover for their renewed relationship. But how far had it gone? Was this just emotional, or had it already become physical? And how had I come to the point where I was asking these kinds of questions about my own wife? I knew this couldn't go on forever. I began to seriously consider divorce. Was that the only way out for me? Could our marriage still be saved if it had ever truly been real? I decided to confront Eric. It wasn't hard to arrange. We'd seen each other a few times at events related to Luke, but I'd never paid him much attention. Now, with everything I knew, this meeting was inevitable. I invited him out for a beer to talk about Luke. Eric agreed without hesitation, which surprised me. Maybe he was playing his own game. We sat down at a bar, ordered drinks, and for the first few minutes talked about everything related to Luke. Eric seemed calm and confident, his speech measured. But after a while, I decided to push things further. "How are things between you and Amanda?" I asked suddenly. His eyes narrowed, but he kept his composure. "We get along well," he replied, taking a sip of his beer. "It's important for Luke." I decided to push harder. "Seems like it's more than just for Luke," I said slowly, watching his reaction. "It feels like she spends a lot of time at your place." Eric didn't change his facial expression, but I saw the tension in his hands. He wasn't going to admit anything. He had his plan, and I could tell he wasn't going to give up playing this game. This only confirmed my suspicions. "You're overreacting, Jack," he finally said. "We're just staying in touch for the kid." I could see the lie in his eyes. He wouldn't confess, but everything I needed to know was already obvious. After the meeting with Eric, I was more certain than ever that they were hiding something. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Now it was time for decisive action. When I got home, I felt a strange calm settle over me, as if something had shifted. I needed more proof to finalize my next steps. I went into our bedroom and decided to search her things. Amanda had always been meticulous, but I knew people always leave traces. After a few minutes of searching, I found something, a small hotel receipt. It was from last month, and it was for one of the days she had stayed at Eric's because of Luke. My heart started pounding. I wasn't doubting anymore. I knew what I had to do next. But now, holding this evidence in my hands, I felt like I was finally in control of the situation. Everything was clear, and now I knew how to proceed. I started preparing for my next move. I couldn't hold it in any longer. That night, when Amanda came home after yet another meeting, I decided to corner her. We sat in the kitchen, and I stared at her while she acted as if everything was normal. I couldn't stand it anymore. "We need to talk," I said. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of anxiety. "About what?" she asked, trying to maintain her calm demeanor. I placed the hotel receipt on the table in front of her. "What's this?" I asked quietly, watching her reaction closely. At first, she went pale but quickly regained her composure. She was a master of lies, but now she had nowhere to hide. "It's not what you think," she started, but I interrupted her. "Enough, Amanda. I know everything. About Eric, about your meetings, about how you talk about me with him. You compare me to him, and that's the worst part." She stayed silent. It was as if all the words had left her. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. All that was left was the betrayal that had deeply corroded the vows we once made. "If you don't stop," I continued, "this is over. Either you choose him or you save our marriage." This was my ultimatum. I didn't know how she would react, but I couldn't endure her lies any longer. Amanda sat in silence after my words. Her eyes were no longer confident. Now they were filled with panic, realizing that everything had come to light. I had given her a choice, and she knew there was nowhere to hide. "It's not what you think, Jack." Her voice trembled. For the first time in a long time, I saw her lose control of the situation. "Eric, it was a mistake. We shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done it, I replied coldly. But you did, and now I don't know how to trust you. After everything I found, I laid out the photos from her phone, the messages, the hotel receipts. Her eyes widened as she realized just how much I knew. She hung her head, and a heavy silence fell between us. My anger had turned into cold determination. I don't know how it happened, she finally whispered. We were just spending time together for Luke. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I couldn't listen to her excuses anymore. You made your choice the moment you decided to be with him again. You chose him over me. So now, I'm making my choice. I took a deep breath. It's over. Amanda froze. She finally understood that her actions had led us to this point. It was hard for me to say the words, but I couldn't live in this lie any longer. Our marriage was broken, and now I had to act decisively. Jack, Her voice cracked. She tried to say something, but nothing she could say mattered anymore. I had already made my decision. The decision to leave her had already solidified in my mind. But it wasn't just about the divorce. I felt like I had to do more. She had betrayed me, humiliated me, and now I wanted everyone around her to feel it too. I needed to expose her for who she truly was. She didn't deserve any sympathy after what she had done. I began gathering all the evidence I had. I collected the messages, the photos, the documents. These were my weapons. My plan was simple. I would send everything to the people who knew us both. Her friends, colleagues, even mutual acquaintances. I wanted everyone to see who she really was. That night, while Amanda was asleep, I drafted an email. I detailed her betrayal and attached screenshots of her messages with Eric, the hotel bills where they met, and even some photos I had saved from her phone. I wasn't the kind of man who forgave when someone trampled on my life. Tomorrow it would all be over. Tomorrow everyone would know the truth. My phone buzzed nonstop all morning. Messages, emails, all from the people I had sent the truth about Amanda to. Some were shocked, others simply stayed silent. But I knew her reputation was now ruined. Amanda still didn't know what had happened. She woke up and acted like everything was the same. But today, I couldn't just sit and watch anymore. She was about to see the consequences of her actions. Suddenly, I heard her scream from the living room. She stood there with her phone in hand, shocked as she read messages from her friends and coworkers. She was staring at the screen, seeing how people were starting to turn against her. "What did you do?" she screamed, her voice shaking with panic. "You got what you deserved," I said coldly. "You played with me, with our life, and now everyone knows the truth." Amanda couldn't believe it. She collapsed onto the couch, clutching her phone, as tears streamed down her face. But I didn't feel sorry for her anymore. She had crossed a line, and now she was paying the price. I felt no joy, no satisfaction. It was just something that needed to be done. "Jack, please." Her voice was weak again, but this time it wasn't convincing. She knew it was all over. A month had passed since everything was exposed. Amanda no longer lived with me. After her reputation was ruined, she packed her things and moved in with Eric. She tried to salvage her face in front of the world, but everyone already knew who she truly was. I didn't regret what I had done, but I felt empty. Revenge hadn't given me the satisfaction I thought it would. It just left a void. I knew it was all in the past now, and I had to start a new life, but I still didn't know where to begin. I stood in front of the mirror in our now empty bedroom, thinking about the years we had spent together. She had been a part of my life, but now that was all behind me. I looked at myself and saw a man who had survived betrayal, survived the pain, but hadn't broken. Now I could start fresh. Ahead of me was a new chapter, and although I didn't know what would come next, I was ready for whatever life had in store.